You guys are probably like, oh my god, who the hell is that? Because I never wear makeup in my videos. And my hair is wet because I just had a shower. There's no in between. I'm either barn dirty or fresh out of the shower because I'm always at the barn. Hi guys, this video is going to be along the same lines as the bit debate. However, this is going to be the turnout debate. So it's going to be talking about turnout versus stalling, which one is better and why, and what the pros and cons of both are, and ultimately what the best decision for your horse is based off of their physical and mental well-being. So I'm going to be citing sources again. I'm using my textbook from my equine behavior class, written by Paul McGreevy, and it has a lot of studies that it uses that are all cited in this book. So everything in this book actually has a source, and you can look up the book and see what they're sourcing. You can buy it yourself, do whatever you want, and do whatever you want with this information. I'm just going to be providing the factual information based off of what we know about horses right now. Okay, so the first thing we're going to discuss is the digestive system of the horse and why this is important when you're considering what type of turnout to have for them or to have them in a stall, and you need to take into account how their digestive system works and keep that in mind when you're deciding what to do with your horse turnout wise. Okay, so we're going to talk about the horse's digestive tract and why this is relevant when considering how to house them. Their stomach is quite small in comparison to their size. It can hold about 8 to 15 liters, and it empties very quickly, which is in about 12 minutes after filling. Food can go from the mouth to the cecum in about 1.5 hours, which is also very quickly. The cecum, for those of you who do not know, is a blind sac that is approximately 1.2 meters long that can hold 28 to 36 liters of feed or fluid. It's a microbial vat that is similar to the rumen in cows. The microbes in it break down food that was not digested in the small intestine, and this is particularly fibrous feeds like hay, grass, etc. And the feed remains in the cecum for about 7 hours. So, because of the small nature of the stomach and how quickly it empties, horses are meant to be eating consistently throughout the day. They are called trickle feeders because of this. This is why horses are made to graze on large pastures and be moving around as they eat, because it helps with digestion. They're not meant to stand around after eating and have very little movement throughout the day. This does not help with digestion, and this is why colic is so much more common in stalled horses, because they do not get the same movement with their heads down that horses who get to graze on pasture get. The colic rate in horses who are stalled is very, very high in comparison to horses who are pastured. From my own personal experience, when I was stabling my horses in a barn where they were getting very little turnout, it was just into small paddocks for probably like 6 to 8 hours a day. I saw way more horses colic, and we actually had a few deaths. And now that I've gone to the turnout route in pasture and 24/7 turnout, I've virtually seen no colic cases other than very, very minor ones. I've not seen any really bad cases or anything like that anywhere near to the same extent. So, and it's also just a fact. If you look into it, horses who are stabled more colic more. It's a way higher risk of colic. The digestive system of the horses changed very little throughout the years and evolution, and people and what we expect of horses has changed quite a lot. So we up the workload of horses to have them be sport animals, and this requires there to be fed concentrates, which are grains, and this is not as good for them because these are often large meals that fill the stomach, and then horses typically go for hours a day without eating much else because they're usually fed hay and feedings that are 3 to 4 times a day, and then if they eat their hay before the next feeding, they'll be sitting without anything to eat, and this is not very good for them. So, this coupled with the fact that they do not get to move around anywhere near the same amount that they would have used to in the wild and before they were expected to be ridden by people and used, means that because their digestive system hasn't adapted with our decisions of what to use them for, they're not well suited for what our demands are now. So this is why colic is seen more, and we also see issues like ulcers, which are caused by stress and also by the fact that the acid buildup without food in the stomach will damage the stomach. So Ulcers are seen in like upwards of 70% of performance horses and almost 90% of race horses. And this is because of the fact that they're stabled more and they're often traveling a lot, which contributes to the stress, and then also the feeding practices. So this is why we're seeing so many more cases of ulcers and problems like colic. So to sum up on my comments about the digestive system, what I'm going to, like, my main point is that the horse's digestive system is very complex and it's specifically designed for a free-ranging grazing animal and trickle feeding throughout the day. So because of how we have changed our expectations of horses and how we keep them, the digestive system hasn't developed with that, and it can result in problems, which we see lots already. A lot of horses have ulcers, and you know a horse with ulcers. You may think you don't, but there are horses out there, like lots, that have ulcers, and owners just often don't know or don't do anything about it. It's more often than not like that your horse will have ulcers, especially if they're stabled a lot. So it's definitely something to keep in mind, because it is literally around 70% of all types of performance horses that have them. Okay, so if the digestive system wasn't enough to kind of make you reconsider feeding practices and stabling practices, I'm also going to talk about circulation. When horses are not allowed to move in the manner that they are supposed to, the blood will pool in the extremities because they're not moving around to help with the circulation, and this is why we see horses getting stocked up in stalls and stuff like that. Okay, so stalling can also have problems with the respiratory system because there's less ventilation in stables compared to outside, obviously, and they're standing in their waste a lot of the day. Even if you clean your stall twice a day, there's still hours where they're going to have been standing in their own pee and poo, and particles from this will go into the air and they'll inhale them. Specifically with the pee, the ammonia from the pee can be damaging for the respiratory system. So if your horse is stalled, that's something to keep in mind, because you'll want to make sure that they're getting good ventilation. Like if you have fans and lots of windows, like open those up and clean the stalls as much as possible. Like even if you do spot cleaning throughout the day, especially if they're on your own property, that's a good idea. But it's just really important to keep in mind that if your horse is in a stall all day, it's not good for them on many accounts. Okay, so I have a couple other physical problems to bring up with stalling. Some of these problems are refusal to lie down. This isn't something I've personally seen or dealt with, but this can happen due to the small dimensions of stalls. If a horse physically cannot find a way to lay down and get up easily in the stall, they may refuse to lie down, and this results in problems because they need to lie down in order to get proper sleep, and this isn't for very long each day, but they still need to. They cannot get the proper REM sleep standing up. Also, another physical problem associated with stalling is getting cast. This is specific to stalling usually because it's way easier to get cast in a stall than it is in a larger turnout. I guess it could happen in small paddocks too, but the larger the turnout, the less likely it is that your horse is going to try to lay down or roll directly next to a fence, unless they're Archie. But this is a problem because this can cause severe lameness issues depending on how long they're cast for, how much they struggle, and it can also cause colic from the stress of getting cast, and it can be a huge problem. It is not good. So stalling is directly associated with the development of stereotypic behaviors. What are stereotypic behaviors, you ask? Stereotypic behaviors are not recognized in free-living feral horses and are not purely a product of domestication, since they are also reported in captive examples of wild equids such as the Przewalski's wild horses. I don't know if I said that properly. I may have butchered it. Okay, so some of these stereotypies are chewing, wood chewing, cribbing, weaving, box walking, pawing, door kicking, which is with the front foot, or box kicking, which is with the hind feet, self-mutilation, head tossing, rubbing self, head circling, head shaking, head nodding, head extending, ears back and nodding, and kicking the stall with the hind feet. So some of these sound basically the same, but I'm reading this out of my textbook. So these type of vices, the most influential theory regarding them is that this is how horses cope with stress or boredom, which is also can cause stress. So The problem with this is that when we do things to try and extinguish this undesirable behavior, it can often cause more built-up stress. So if your horse is cribbing because they're stressed because they're locked in a stall all day, and you just throw on a cribbing collar to stop the cribbing, it can cause more stress that they just internalize because they have no viable means to cope with the stress of being in their stall and unable to move in the manner that they would like to. So if your horse has problems like these, the best way to try and target it is change what originally may have caused the behavior. For example, if your horse is stalled a lot and you know they're doing these, the best way to try to prevent how often they're doing these behaviors is by turning them out and letting them go into a social grouping with other horses and just giving them time to be a horse. Another physical issue that's actually closely tied to the mental issues with stalling is that hypertrophy of the muscles can occur if they're stall walking or weaving, because they can build up one side depending on what direction they're typically going, and this can result in the more trauma to the legs and that side of the body that they're constantly putting the weight on to do that, and also uneven muscling from them always going on that one side. Now, if turnout is not an option for you to combat some of these undesirable things that are directly linked to stalling too much, then you can try to help your horse cope with the stress of being in such an unnatural environment by ensuring that they're in a barn where there's bars between the stalls so that they can see and touch and interact with the other horses. Or if that's not an option, you can try putting a mirror in their stall, but make sure it's not glass, because if they break it by accident, then they'll cut themselves. Or you can provide them with toys, you can provide them with different types of forages. It's been found in studies that if horses have been given different types of forages to sample and kind of move between in a stall, they have less stress. So this could be like if you soak alfalfa cubes or something, and then you provide them with some like hay and maybe a little bit of grain, but obviously you don't want to do free choice grain because they'd probably gorge themselves. But these are some options that you can use to try to help them cope with a suboptimal environment. But the main thing that I would say is if you have the option to not have your horse sitting in a stall for most of the day, then I would 100% go with that, because it is better for them. There's really no argument to say that stalling's better. The only real pros to stalling over turnout are that you can manage their feed more. If they're not out with other horses, you can make sure that they're getting a very individualized feed program. And they stay cleaner, I guess, unless your horse rolls in their own poo. It's easier for people just to go and get them out of their stall rather than going into a field to catch their horse. And that's about it. There hasn't been found to be any more instance of injury in turnout, so that argument really isn't a viable one if you provide your horse with safe fencing and safe turnout. And if they are out with other horses, you just want to make sure that no horses have back shoes on. But it has not been found that more injury occurs outside. If anything, they might just get more cuts and abrasions, but really if that's your deciding factor for not putting your horse outside, which is kind of a basic necessity, then that's pretty selfish. Okay, so I'm going to touch on this because this is always an excuse I hear for people on why they choose not to turn out their horse. It's, oh, if I turn him out, he goes crazy, he doesn't like it, he likes being in a stall, he paces the fence, he's so nervous, he gets stressed outside. Okay, and this is usually used with horses who have been stalled their entire lives, basically, and have gotten used to that, and no wonder they're stressed when they go outside. If you were locked in a room by yourself and then just thrown out into a big area with, like, other horses, you'd probably be like, holy crap, this is, like, absolutely terrifying, and I wouldn't blame you. So if your horse is like that, you need to introduce them to things very slowly and be patient with them, because ultimately if your horse doesn't like it, it doesn't really matter to, like, if they get stressed, you kind of want to get them used to it, because in the end it'll be better for their health. So for their health, you need to try and introduce them to turnout and get them relaxed and not just throw them out there and just expect them to be able to handle it when they've never had to for a large portion of their life, and they've grown used to being in a little box and they feel safe in there. So you need to show them they can feel safe outside, and you need to be patient if you want it to work, because in the end it will be what's best for their health once you get them over that mental hump that's telling them, I'm not safe out here, I need to be in a small box. So that's an anxiety thing. That's kind of a learned behavior because you've taught them that they're only going to be in a box, and then they're thrown out into a big area and they're like, ah. Another thing to keep in mind is that horses are very, very social creatures. They're herd animals. They really rely on social interaction. So depriving your horse of this, which is also something that's closely tied to stalling, it's really not fair to them. They need to be able to socialize, even if it's just touching a horse's nose through the bars of a stall or over a fence. I'm not saying that you have to turn them out with other horses, but it is the best case scenario. However, I do understand that if you have a competition horse and they have back shoes on, it is not safe to put them out with other horses because this can result in way more injuries. But they should be able to touch noses and kind of interact with horses. And yes, this includes stallions, because stallions can actually go out with other stallions. But you just need a large turnout. You don't want to put them in a close turnout or around mares that they could fight over. Or stallions can also go with other geldings. So there are ways to socialize your horses even if you own a stallion. And there really isn't an excuse to isolate your horse just because you chose to keep their balls intact. That's really not fair, and that's also selfish. So some ways that you can try and better how you manage your horse and ensure that they're healthier: making sure that they have hay in front of them all the time. Even if your horse is on a diet, you can do this by getting a slow feeder to slow down their intake of hay so that they have more hay in front of them all the time. And you can also put them out on grass and allow them to graze if this is an option where you are, or you can just give them free choice hay, which is probably the best case option if you can. But obviously if your horse has a health issue that makes that not possible, or if where you board makes that not possible, then I would recommend the slow feeder. I already mentioned toys in the stall and trying to get boarding at a place where they have bars so that they can talk to the other horses. And I also mentioned the varied foraging type thing. Okay, this video isn't to say that you do not love your horse if you cannot provide them with turnout. However, I do think that it is very ignorant and selfish of people to deny the facts in order to make themselves feel better. Like, if you try to justify what you're doing by saying, oh, it's not going to hurt my horse, if he was upset he'd show me, or my horse likes to stall, and all of that, and you're trying to just justify and make excuses for why it's fine in your case and why it's not a health risk, I think that's wrong, because if you're doing that, then you're probably not doing much in the way to make up for the fact that they're not getting out. So if you're aware of the facts and aware of the risks of stalling and how detrimental it can be to their mental and physical health, then you're probably going to do more to make up for the fact that your horse can't live a more natural lifestyle, and that's very important. So if you know you don't have the optimal situation in terms of turnout and management, but you're doing your best to make do, then I'd say you're a good horse person. But if you try to ignore the facts and just stay in your own bubble to make yourself feel safe and secure at the detriment of your horse, I think that's wrong. Okay, so with how the world is nowadays and how little free land there is available, I do understand that like big field turnout isn't available to everyone around the world. However, I do think that barns need to move towards making sure that they at least have paddock turnout for at least a few hours a day. Like, ideally, you do not want your horse stabled for more than 12 hours, but if that isn't an option, obviously, like, some turnout is better than none. And then if your horse is stalled a lot, the more you can get out to the barn to take them for hand walks throughout the day, and you'll need to make sure to work them pretty much every day so that they can get rid of that excess energy. But you just do not want them standing in the stall doing nothing for hours and hours on end. It's a way bigger commitment time-wise. However, it'll pay off in the end because you'll have a happier horse if you take some of these tips in mind to try and make it easier for your horse to handle the stress of being in such an unnatural environment. And obviously, everything we do with horses nowadays is unnatural, but stalling it constantly just really isn't fair to the horse, and we really need to try and change people's viewpoint on this, because I find it's way more widely accepted to lock your horse up 24/7 than it is to even lock like a dog up. Like, if I got like a border collie and I locked them up in a kennel 24/7, I would have people at my door calling me an abuser, which would be fair. But for whatever reason, it's viewed as more acceptable to do that to a horse, despite the fact that they're supposed to be moving around upwards of 30 kilometers a day with their heads down grazing. So there are lots of problems that are obviously caused by straying from their norm so far. And I do think that we all need to take into account how we can better their lives, even if we can't offer them the ideal situation. So it's just important to make sure that you're educated about that and trying to keep in mind how you can better your horse's life based off of what you can change and what you can do to personally offer them a better situation. So I really hope that this was helpful, and I'm not trying to like attack anyone or say that like you're not a good horse owner or anything. Like, I'm sure you all do love your horses, but these are just the facts. And like, I used to be one of those people that stalled my horse a lot and he didn't get enough turnout, my Arab, and I really regret it. I noticed a huge change in his behavior when we eventually did move him somewhere with more turnout. Like, it was like night and day. He used to bolt a lot and he was very spooky and hot all the time, and he was like beginner safe once he got turned out. So it can have a huge impact on their behavior. Like, I know for a fact Milo would be a complete nightmare if he didn't get turnout. Like, he would be aggressive, he'd be nasty, and he'd be crazy to handle. It would just be ridiculous. Like, I always get people telling me that my horses are so good for their age because I can do a lot of stuff with them, like the bridle-less riding and like taking them for hacks, and they're not super spooky. And if I were to stall them and change their management and make it so that they did not have access to a field, they'd be very, very different horses. So a lot of it is how they're managed. And if you find that you're in a barn full of crazy horses, or you keep getting horses and they're getting crazy, it's probably something to do with the management. That's like one of my number one pet peeves about people with thoroughbreds saying that they're all crazy and stuff. Same with Arabs, actually. I find that like both those breeds are stalled a fair amount, especially when they're on the show circuit or on the racetrack, and it gives them an unfair reputation because they're not given their best chance. You can't expect a horse to be quiet and respectful at all times, especially when they're young, when you don't provide them with the means to reliably release that energy and actually practice their natural behavior. It's not fair, and it's not fair to blame the horse or the breed for that.